The Burning Path, the first attack happened on the anniversary of the bombing. This was not an accident. Admiral G1 wanted the Valori to understand that humanity remembered. Humanity would always remember. Captain Hannah led the vanguard force of 30 ships. She was 40 years old, a former submarine captain who had adapted quickly to the 3 dimensions of space combat. Her ship was called the Silent Hammer. It was not a pretty name, but it was honest. The target was the Valori forward base on Proxima Centauri 4. This was the closest enemy installation to Earth. It served as the command center for all Valori operations in the region. 3,000 Valori soldiers lived there, along with support staff and their families. Hannah felt nothing about the families. She had lost her own daughter and soul. The universe did not care about fairness. Neither did she. The Valori detected the incoming ships when they were 2 hours away. Station Commander Grolak looked at the sensor data with confusion. The ships were small. They had no shield signatures. Their design was primitive and ugly. He laughed. These were clearly human ships. The primitives had somehow built spacecraft. How cute. How pointless. Grolak ordered his defense fleet to intercept. 12 Valori warships moved out to meet the human vanguard. These ships were beautiful, with curved hulls and glowing energy weapons. They had won 100 battles against a dozen species. They never won another. Captain Hannah gave a simple order. Fire. 30. Kinetic accelerators released their payloads at the same moment. 30 tungsten slugs, each one massing 50 kilograms, shot forward at 12% of light speed. They crossed the distance to the Valori fleet in seconds. The Valori shields flickered on. Energy barriers designed to stop lasers and plasma surrounded each ship. The tungsten slugs passed through the shields like they did not exist. Kinetic energy could not be redirected or absorbed by shield technology. The shields were designed for energy weapons. Against solid matter moving at relativistic speeds, they were useless. 12 Valori warships died in a single instant. Some were cut in half. Some exploded as the slugs hit their reactors. Some simply crumpled like paper crushed by a giant hand. Commander Grolak stared at his screens. His brain refused to accept what his eyes were seeing. His fleet was gone. One shot. All gone. The human ships did not stop to celebrate. They accelerated toward the station. More tungsten slugs followed. The station's defensive platforms vanished. Its weapons arrays vanished. Its communication towers vanished. Grolak managed to send one message before the Silent Hammer's main accelerator punched through his command center. The message was simple. They are coming. Stop them. But no one could stop them. The attack on Proxima Centauri 4 took 47 minutes from first shot to last. 3,000 Valori died. Humanity lost 0 ships. 0 personnel. Word spread across Valori space. At first, no one believed it. The primitives from Earth? Impossible. The reports must be wrong. The station must have been hit by a meteor or a malfunction. Then the second attack came, and the third. And the fourth. Captain Hannah's vanguard was just the beginning. The full Ghost Fleet followed in waves. Admiral G1 coordinated the attacks from her flagship, the Final Answer. She never raised her voice. She never showed emotion. She simply pointed at targets and watched them die. The Valori scrambled to respond. They pulled ships from distant sectors. They formed defensive lines. They prepared ambush. None of it mattered. Human ships were faster than Valori ships. Human weapons were stronger than Valori weapons. And human tactics were something the Valori had never encountered. For 12,000 years, the Valori had fought species who tried to survive, species who negotiated, species who surrendered when the situation became hopeless. Humans did not try to survive. Humans did not negotiate. Humans did not surrender. Humans simply attacked until their enemies stopped existing. Ambassador Dessou appeared on every broadcast frequency across Valori space. She was a small woman with gray hair and calm eyes. Before the attack, she had been a diplomat at the United Nations. Now she was the voice of human vengeance. Her message was short. You had 12,000 years to learn mercy. We learned in 90 seconds that mercy is a luxury. Now you will learn what we learned. The Galactic Council finally paid attention. Reports flooded into Unity Prime from across the region. The primitives from Earth were destroying everything. The Valori could not stop them. The Valori could not even slow them down. Emergency sessions were called. Debates erupted. Some species demanded that the Council send fleets to help the Valori. Others argued that this was a Valori problem caused by Valori actions. Why should they risk their own ships? The truth was simpler than any of them wanted to admit. They were afraid. The humans had done something impossible. They had gone from primitive to dominant in 10 years. They had created weapons that ignored shields. They had built ships that flew faster than anything the Council possessed. How had they done this? What else could they do? And most importantly, would they stop with the Valori? Young pilot Minho flew in the third wave. His fighter was part of a squadron that cleared the way for the larger warships. He was good at his job. Very good. His kill count rose with every battle, but he felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not triumph, not even relief. He simply did what needed to be done and waited for the next mission. One night, between attacks, he floated in the darkness of his cockpit and looked at the stars. His grandmother had told him stories about those stars when he was a child. Stories about wonder and exploration and the beauty of the universe. He did not see beauty anymore. He saw targets. He saw enemies. He saw a galaxy that had watched his people burn and done nothing. His grandmother had died in the long winter after the bombs. Starvation and cold had taken her. Minho had buried her himself in frozen ground that he had to break with a pickaxe. He closed his eyes and remembered her face. Then he opened them and returned to work. The burning path continued. Colony after colony fell. Outpost after outpost vanished. The Valori Empire, which had stood for 6,000 years, crumbled like dry bread. Survivors fled toward the homeworld. They carried stories of the human ships, silent and fast and merciless. They described the kinetic rounds that came without warning. They described the broadcast that promised more pain. Fear spread faster than any ship could fly. By the time the Ghost Fleet turned toward Kareth Prime, the Valori homeworld, every member of that species knew what was coming. They knew, and they could not stop it. Admiral G1 looked at the navigation chart on her command screen. The homeworld was marked with a red circle. The final target. The end of the first chapter. She allowed herself a small smile. It was not a happy expression. It was the smile of a woman who had waited 10 years for this moment. The fleet jumped to faster than light speed. The stars blurred and vanished. Kareth Prime had 3 days left. The unprovoked strike, the Galactic Council had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. They sat in their great chamber on the station called Unity Prime, where representatives from 47 species gathered to decide the fate of worlds. They believed they were wise. They believed they were just. They believed they were the highest form of life in the universe. They were wrong about all of these things. The council worked in a simple way. The strong species made the rules. The weak species followed them. Any world that had not yet discovered faster than light travel was considered primitive. These primitive worlds had no rights. They could be studied. They could be harvested. They could be destroyed. The council did not care. The Valori were one of the oldest species in the council. They looked like tall lizards that walked on 2 legs. Their scales were dark green, and their eyes were yellow with black slits. They had conquered many worlds in their long history. They were proud of this. They displayed the bones of extinct species in their museums like trophies. When Valori scouts discovered a small blue planet in a quiet corner of the galaxy, they saw opportunity. The planet was called Earth by its inhabitants. These inhabitants called themselves humans. The Valori watched them for several years from orbit. They saw that humans were violent. They fought wars against each other. They polluted their own air and water. They had primitive spacecraft that could barely reach their own moon. Ambassador Torak of the Valori went before the council with a simple request. He wanted resource acquisition rights for the Sol system. This was a polite way of saying he wanted permission to take everything of value from Earth and its neighboring planets. What happened to the humans was not his concern. The council debated for exactly 14 minutes. Most representatives did not even speak. The humans were primitive. They had no voice in the chamber. They had no allies. They had nothing that mattered to the council. The vote passed with 43 in favor, 2 against, and 2 abstaining. The 2 species who voted against were considered strange by the others. They were soft. They worried about things that did not matter. Torak smiled as he received the approval. The Valori fleet would launch within the month. On a spring morning in Seoul, South Korea, Lieutenant Yuna sat at her monitoring station. She was 26 years old. She had joined the Republic of Korea Space Command because she loved the stars. She dreamed of humanity reaching out to touch them someday. The alarm on her console began to flash. Something was entering Earth's atmosphere. Many somethings. She counted 12 objects, each one larger than any satellite she had ever tracked. She reached for her communication device to call her commander. His name was Do-won, a serious man who had served for 30 years. But before she could speak a single word, the sky outside her window turned white. The Valori called what happened next a pacification protocol. It was designed to break a species quickly. The 12 objects were bombs, but not nuclear bombs. These were much worse. They released energy that turned everything within 50 kilometers into ash and dust. The Valori had chosen their targets carefully. New York, Los Angeles, London, Paris, Berlin, Moscow, Beijing, Tokyo, Mumbai, Cairo, Sydney, and Seoul. Yuna was lucky. The Seoul bomb landed in the heart of the city, and her station was on the outskirts. The blast wave threw her across the room. The ceiling collapsed. She lay in the darkness, bleeding from cuts on her face, as the screams of her colleagues filled the air. 340 million humans died in 90 seconds. It was the largest loss of life in human history. And it was not an act of war. To the Valori, it was pest control. Commander Do-won was in a bunker 300 kilometers away when the bombs fell. He watched the satellite feeds with a face made of stone. Seoul was gone. His wife was gone. His 2 daughters were gone. Everything he had loved was now a crater of melted glass. But Do-won did not cry. He did not scream. He simply watched, and something inside him turned cold and hard like iron. The Valori landed their harvesting ships 2 weeks later. They expected to find a broken species. They expected humans to bow down in fear. They expected to take what they wanted without any trouble. They found something different. Humans did not bow. Humans hid. They disappeared into bunkers and tunnels and underground shelters. The surface was left empty and silent. The Valori found their harvesting operations attacked by small groups of fighters who struck and vanished like ghosts. At first, the Valori laughed at these attacks. Human weapons were primitive. Bullets could not pierce Valori armor. Human explosives barely scratched their vehicles. The attacks were annoying, nothing more. But the attacks did not stop. They grew more frequent, more organized. And each time, the humans learned something new. They captured Valori weapons and figured out how they worked. They took pieces of Valori technology and studied them in hidden laboratories in a bunker beneath the Korean mountains. Yuna recovered from her injuries. The scars on her face would never fully heal. She did not want them to heal. She wanted to remember. Do-won stood before the survivors of the Korean military. His voice was quiet but steady. He told them that the old world was dead. The old rules were dead. The old dreams of peaceful exploration were dead. Now there was only one goal, one purpose, one reason to keep breathing. Revenge. Word spread through the underground networks that connected the surviving human settlements. In the ruins of Europe, in the tunnels beneath Africa, in the hidden bases of the Americas, people listened. They agreed. The humans stopped fighting each other. The wars that had divided them for centuries suddenly seemed foolish. What did borders matter when aliens had burned their cities? What did politics matter when their children lay in mass graves? The Valori noticed the change. They reported to the council that the humans had become strangely quiet. The small attacks had stopped. The planet seemed pacified at last. Ambassador Torak smiled when he read the reports. He had been right. These primitives were not special. They were just like every other weak species the Valori had crushed throughout history. He could not have been more wrong. Deep beneath the earth, in bunkers and tunnels and secret facilities, humanity was not giving up. They were planning. They were building. They were waiting. And they were learning to hate. The Galactic Council forgot about Earth. It was a small matter, hardly worth remembering. They had made a mistake that day in the voting chamber. Not a mistake of cruelty, for they did not recognize cruelty against primitives as wrong. Their mistake was simpler. They had assumed that power was permanent. They had assumed that the weak would stay weak forever. They had assumed wrong. In the darkness, beneath the scorched earth, humanity sharpened its claws. They would remember this day. They would remember every face they had lost. They would remember the white light and the screams and the silence that followed. And one day, they would make the galaxy remember too. The silent decade. 10 years passed. The surface of Earth became a graveyard. Radiation from the bombs poisoned the land around the 12 craters. Dust clouds blocked the sun for 3 years, killing crops and forests. The Valori took what resources they wanted and left automated mining machines to collect the rest. But beneath the dead surface, something was growing. The survivors had scattered across the planet in the first months after the attack. They lived in old military bunkers, abandoned mines, subway tunnels, and caves. They ate stored food and hunted animals that had survived the darkness. Many died from hunger and disease. Many more died from despair, but some refused to die. And slowly, these survivors found each other. Admiral Ji-won had been a captain in the Korean Navy when the bombs fell. She was in a submarine deep beneath the Pacific Ocean. She felt the shock waves travel through the water. When she finally surfaced 3 days later, she found a world she did not recognize. For 3 years, Ji-won traveled across the ruined planet. She gathered survivors. She united scattered military units. She brought together scientists and engineers and soldiers from every nation that had once existed. They no longer called themselves Korean or American or Russian. They simply called themselves human. The Earth Defense Compact was born in a bunker beneath the Swiss Alps. Leaders from what remained of humanity agreed on one thing. They would never be weak again. They would never be victims again. They would build a force capable of striking back at the creatures who had hurt them. Ji-won was chosen to lead this force. She accepted without hesitation. She had watched Seoul die from a distance. She had lost her parents, her brother, and everyone she had ever loved. There was nothing left inside her but cold determination. The first challenge was understanding Valori technology. This is where Dr. Teehee became important. She was a physicist who had worked at the Korean Institute for Advanced Study before the attack. She had survived by pure luck, visiting a colleague in an underground research facility when the bombs fell. Teehee led a team of scientists who studied captured Valori equipment. A crashed scout ship provided the most valuable information. The ship had been damaged by human missiles during the early resistance. Its pilot had died, but its computers still worked. It took Teehee 2 years to decode the Valori language. It took another year to understand their basic science. What she learned shocked her. The Valori were not geniuses. Their technology was old, passed down from species that had existed before them. They had not invented most of it. They had stolen it or traded for it over thousands of years. They had stopped trying to innovate long ago because they believed they were already the best. This gave Teehee hope. If the Valori had stopped growing, humanity could catch up. Humanity could surpass them. Engineer Suho became Teehee's closest partner. He was a practical man who had built bridges and power plants before the attack. Now he built engines and reactors. His hands were always covered in grease, and his eyes were always tired. But his mind never stopped working. The Valori used a drive system that bent space to travel faster than light. It was elegant but inefficient. Suho studied the principles and designed something better. His drive was faster, used less energy, and was easier to build. When he showed his design to Teehee, she laughed for the first time in 3 years. The Valori would never expect this. They believed primitives could not match their technology. They would learn differently. Weapons specialist Yoonji approached the problem with a different mindset. She did not want to copy Valori weapons. She wanted to create something new, something the galaxy had never seen. Yoonji had been an artillery officer who loved mathematics. She calculated trajectories in her head for fun. Now she applied that love to destruction. The Valori used energy weapons, lasers and plasma and force beams. These weapons were powerful but had limitations. They could be blocked by shields. They lost strength over distance. They required massive power supplies. EUNG proposed something simpler: kinetic accelerators, guns that fired solid projectiles at incredible speeds. A piece of tungsten the size of a fist, traveling at 12% of light speed, carried more destructive energy than a nuclear bomb. No shield in the galaxy could stop it. The laws of physics made it unstoppable. Admiral Ji-won approved the design immediately. She understood the poetry of it. The Valori had tried to knock humanity back to the Stone Age. Humanity would respond with the oldest weapon in existence: a rock, a very fast rock. Young Minho was only 8 years old when the bombs fell. He survived because his family lived in a remote village in the mountains. He watched his father die of radiation sickness 2 years later. He watched his mother work herself to death in the underground farms that fed the survivors. At 18, Minho volunteered for pilot training. He was small and quiet, and the recruiters almost rejected him. But his test scores were perfect. His reflexes were faster than anyone they had measured. And his eyes held something that made the older soldiers nod in approval. Hatred, cold and patient and absolute. The Ghost fleet took shape in hidden shipyards beneath the Earth's surface. Massive caverns were hollowed out to hold the construction base. Thousands of workers labored in shifts that never ended. They built the ships by hand because they had no factories. They welded the holes and wired the systems and installed the weapons one piece at a time. 200 warships. Each one was ugly by Valori standards. No graceful curves or decorative elements. Just sharp angles and thick armor and rows of kinetic accelerators that looked like teeth. Minho stood before the fleet on the day it was completed. He was 22 years old now. A pilot. A weapon. Admiral G1 addressed the assembled forces in the main cavern. Her voice echoed off the stone walls. She did not give a long speech. She did not need to. Everyone there knew why they had worked so hard. Everyone there carried the same weight in their hearts. She said only this: "They taught us what the universe truly is. Now we teach them what humanity truly is." The crews boarded their ships. The engines powered up, filling the caverns with a low hum that vibrated in every chest. The exit tunnels opened, revealing the dark sky above. On the surface, the Valori mining machines continued their work. They did not notice the vibrations beneath the ground. They did not notice the subtle changes in the earth. They were machines. They did not know how to fear. The humans rose from their graves, like ghosts, silent, invisible, unstoppable. The ghost fleet gathered on the dark side of the moon. From there, they could see Earth, a wounded planet, scarred and burned, but still beautiful. Still home. Minho looked at it through the window of his fighter craft. He remembered his village in the mountains. He remembered his father's laugh and his mother's cooking and the sound of birds in the morning. All gone now. All dead. He turned away from the window and faced forward. Toward the stars. Toward the enemy. 10 years of silence were about to end. 10 years of building and planning and waiting were about to pay off. The galaxy thought humanity was dead. The galaxy was about to learn the truth. Humanity was just getting started. The fall of the Valoric Earthprime was a beautiful world. Green continents floated in blue oceans. White clouds drifted across the sky. 12 billion Valori lived there, in cities of glass and metal that stretched toward the heavens. The orbital defense grid surrounding the planet was considered the greatest military achievement in galactic history. 400 weapons platforms hung in perfect formation. Shield generators created overlapping barriers that could stop any attack. Automated drones patrolled every approach. No fleet had ever tried to break through. The very idea was considered insane. Admiral G1 studied the grid for 3 days. She examined every scan, every reading, every pattern. She found the weaknesses that the Valori did not know existed. Commander Seojun stood beside her on the bridge of the final answer. He was a tall man with burned scars on his neck and hands. He had survived the bombing of Tokyo by hiding in a basement. The fire had found him anyway. He had crawled through the ruins for 2 days before rescue teams discovered him. Now he commanded the strike force that would break the unbreakable. Defense. G1 pointed at the display. Her finger touched a small gap in the shield coverage. It lasted only 2 seconds every 30 minutes. A timing flaw in the generator rotation. The Valori had never noticed it because no enemy had ever studied their defenses so carefully. 2 seconds was enough. The Battle of Karth Prime began at dawn, local time. The Ghost Fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. 200 warships arranged in a wedge, pointing directly at the homeworld. The Valori defense grid activated immediately. Thousands of weapons powered up. Drones swarmed toward the incoming fleet. Commanders shouted orders. Crews ran to battle stations. For the first time in the war, the humans took losses. The Valori grid was simply too powerful to ignore. Energy beams cut through human ships. Drones exploded against hulls. Missiles found their targets. 42 human ships died in the first hour. 9,000 personnel. Minho watched his squadron leader vanish in a flash of light. He felt the explosion shake his fighter. He kept flying, but the humans did not retreat. They pressed forward, absorbing the punishment, waiting for the gap. When it came, Commander Seojun was ready. A concentrated barrage of kinetic rounds shot through the 2-second opening. They struck the main shield generator before anyone could react. The shields flickered, died, and did not return. Without shields, the weapons platforms were vulnerable. Human ships poured through the gaps, targeting the platforms one by one. The drones, without coordination from the central command, flew in confused circles. The automated systems designed for a very different kind of battle could not adapt. 11 hours after it began, the Battle of Karath Prime ended. The orbital defense grid, pride of the Valori civilization, was scrap metal. The way to the planet was open, but Admiral G1 did not order a bombardment. She did not rain fire down on the cities below. Instead, she ordered something different. Dr. Teehee had created a special weapon for this moment. She called it the Reckoning Device. It was not designed to kill. Death, she had decided, was too easy. Too quick. Too merciful. The Reckoning Device was an electromagnetic pulse, unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It targeted specific frequencies used by Valori technology. Every frequency. All at once. The device activated at noon. On the surface of Karath Prime. Every light went out. Every vehicle stopped. Every communication device went silent. Every computer, every factory, every weapon, every medical device, every piece of technology that the Valori had created over 6,000 years simply stopped working. Forever. The pulse had burned out the circuits at a molecular level. Nothing could be repaired. Nothing could be salvaged. The Valori, masters of a galactic empire, found themselves returned to a state their ancestors had left behind thousands of years ago. Medical Officer Yaren was part of the landing team that touched down in the capital city 3 days later. She walked through streets filled with confused Valori. They did not attack. They did not run. They simply stood and stared, unable to understand what had happened. The hospitals had failed. Valori who depended on medical technology had died. The food distribution systems had collapsed. Already, hunger was spreading. The water purification plants were silent. Disease would follow soon. An elderly Valori approached Yaren. His scales were gray with age. His yellow eyes were wet with something that might have been tears. He spoke in the Valori language, which Yaren's translation device converted to human speech. Why? He asked. Why did you not simply kill us? Why this? Yaren looked at him. She remembered her own grandmother, who had died in Seoul. She remembered her father, who had worked himself to death building the Ghost Fleet. She remembered every face. She had lost. Her voice was flat, empty. Death would have been mercy. You taught us not to show mercy. She walked away. The old Valori sank to his knees and did not move. Across the planet, similar scenes played out. Human soldiers walked through cities that had lost everything. Valori begged for help, for food, for medicine. The humans gave them nothing. They simply watched. They simply recorded. This was not cruelty. This was education. The galaxy would see what happened to those who attacked humanity. The galaxy would learn. Ambassador Torak, who had requested permission to harvest Earth 10 years ago, was found in his government office. He had tried to destroy his records, but without power, he could not access his computers. Human soldiers brought him to Admiral G1 in restraints. She looked at him for a long time. He was smaller than she had imagined. Less impressive. Just a bureaucrat who had signed a death warrant for 340 million people without a second thought. "Do you know who I am?" she asked. He shook his head. "I was in a bunker when your bombs fell. I watched my city die. I watched my family die. I have spent 10 years preparing for this moment." Torak tried to speak. His voice cracked. "Please. I was just following orders." The council approved the action. "I did not know." Ji-won leaned close. Her eyes were cold and dark and endless. "You did not know because you did not care. We were insects to you. Pests. Now look at your world. Look at what your indifference has cost you." She turned away. She did not order his death. She did not need to. Torek would live. He would watch his species struggle. He would carry the weight of what he had done for the rest of his life. That was worse than death. That was the point. The Ghost Fleet remained in orbit for 30 days. Long enough to ensure that no help was coming. Long enough to broadcast images of the fallen homeworld across the galaxy. Long enough to make sure everyone understood. Then they left. They did not occupy Kareth Prime. They did not install a puppet government. They simply departed, leaving the Valori to their fate. A species that had built an empire over 6,000 years had been reduced to nothing in a single day. Not destroyed. Destroyed would have been easier to accept. They had been humiliated, crippled, left alive to remember what they had lost. The message was clear. This is what happens. This is what humanity does to its enemies. The galaxy watched. The galaxy remembered. And the galaxy began to fear. The Reckoning Unity Prime had stood for 12,000 years. The great station floated at the center of the galaxy, a symbol of order and civilization. Here, the Galactic Council made decisions that shaped the fate of trillions. Here, the powerful gathered to divide the stars among themselves. The council chamber was a massive dome of crystal and light. Seats rose in tiers around a central podium. Representatives from 47 species filled those seats, each one dressed in the ceremonial garments of their kind. They whispered to each other as they waited. The whispers were nervous. The whispers were afraid. The humans were coming. Everyone knew what had happened to the Valori. The images had spread across every network in the galaxy. Cities without power. Hospitals without medicine. A proud species brought to its knees. The Valori seat in the council chamber was empty now. No representative had come. Perhaps none ever would again. The great doors at the entrance of the chamber opened. Silence fell like a hammer. Ambassador Jisoo entered first. She wore no ceremonial dress, no jewelry, no symbols of rank, just a simple black uniform, the same one worn by every human soldier. Behind her walked Admiral Jiwon, Commander Seojung, and Captain Hana. Their faces showed nothing. Their eyes showed everything. A single honor guard followed. 20 soldiers in black armor, led by Commander Minho. He was not the young pilot anymore. He had killed more enemies than he could count. He had watched ships burn and worlds fall. He was something harder now. Something that did not flinch. The human delegation walked to the central podium. Their boots echoed on the stone floor. Every eye in the chamber watched them. The High Arbiter rose from his seat of honor. His name was Praxis, and he was the oldest living member of the council. His species were crystalline beings, their bodies made of living mineral that sparkled in the light. He had led the council for 3,000 years. He had never faced a moment like this. His voice filled the chamber, deep and resonant. You stand before this council as representatives of a species that has committed unprecedented acts of aggression. You have destroyed military installations. You have decimated a member species. You have violated every principle of civilized conflict. Jisoo listened to the translation in her earpiece. She waited for Praxis to finish. The council demands an explanation. The council demands reparations. The council demands that humanity submit to our judgment or face the consequences of its actions. The threat hung in the air. Other species shifted in their seats. Warships from a dozen nations floated outside the station. The council still believed it had power here. The council was wrong. Jisoo stepped forward. Her voice was calm, clear, absolute. We have responded, she said. Nothing more, nothing less. The chamber erupted. Representatives shouted in a dozen languages. Praxis raised his crystalline hand for silence, but it took many seconds before order returned. Responded? Praxis repeated. You call the destruction of an empire a response? Yes. Jisoo did not blink. For 12,000 years, this council has decided which species live and which die. You divided the galaxy like a pie, giving pieces to your favorites. You called it civilization. You called it order. She paused. Let the words sink in. 10 years ago, the species in that empty seat asked for permission to murder our people. You granted it. 43 votes in favor. In 14 minutes, you decided that 340 million human beings were worth nothing. They were beneath your notice. Her voice rose slightly. Not anger, just emphasis. You call that civilization? You call that justice? We call it murder. And murderers face consequences. Praxis straightened. His crystalline form crackled with energy. You cannot speak to this council in such terms. You are primitives, newcomers. You have no standing here. Admiral Jiwan stepped forward. She stood beside Jisoo, her presence solid and unmoving. When she spoke, her voice was ice. We are not asking for a seat on your council. We are informing you that this council exists because we permit it to exist. The silence that followed was total, complete. The kind of silence that changes everything. Jiwon continued. Our fleet is larger than yours. Our weapons are stronger than yours. Our drive systems are faster than yours. We could do to any of your homeworlds what we did to Kareth Prime. We choose not to. She let that sink in. Let them understand. But that choice is not permanent. It depends on your actions. Any species that raises a weapon against Earth or her people will meet the same fate as the Valori. Not death. Death is too clean. We will strip away everything you are and leave you to remember what you were. Commander Sejun stepped forward with a data device. He placed it on the podium. The screen showed a map of the galaxy. Human territory was marked in red. It was small, just a tiny dot near one arm of the spiral. But from that dot, lines extended outward. Lines of fire. Lines of conquest. This is the path we traveled, he said. This is what we can do in 90 days. Imagine what we could do in 90 years. Captain Hannah did not speak. She did not need to. Her presence was enough. The captain who had broken the unbreakable defense. The captain who had lost 0 ships in her first engagement. She stood with her hands clasped behind her back and looked at the council with eyes that had seen too much to ever be surprised again. Jisoo resumed speaking. We are not conquerors. We do not want your worlds or your resources. We want only one thing. Acknowledgement. From this day forward, humanity is not a primitive species. We are not targets for harvest. We are equal partners in this galaxy, with equal rights and equal protections. And if we refuse? Praxis asked. His voice had lost some of its power. Then we will return. Not as diplomats. Not as petitioners. We will return as something else entirely. The council looked at each other. They saw the truth in the human eyes. These were not people making threats. These were people stating facts. The vote happened quickly. Faster than any vote in council history. Humanity was granted full membership. Full rights. Full protection. As the human delegation turned to leave, Commander Minho paused at the door. He was the youngest person in the room. He had been a child when his world burned. Now he was a weapon forged in fire. He looked back at the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. His voice was quiet, but it carried in the silent chamber. You looked at our world and saw prey. You should have looked closer. Predators recognized their own. The doors closed behind him. In the chamber, the Galactic Council sat in stunned silence. For 12,000 years, they had been the masters of the stars. They had decided the fate of countless species. They had built an order that seemed eternal. Now that order was broken. Not destroyed, but transformed. A new power had risen. A species born in fire and forged in pain. A species that did not forgive, did not forget, did not stop. Outside the station, the Ghost Fleet hung in formation. 200 warships, battle-scarred but unbroken. Ready for whatever came next, Admiral G1 stood on the bridge of the final answer and looked at the stars. Somewhere out there was Earth, a wounded world slowly healing. A homeworld, waiting for its children to return. The first chapter was over. The Valori had paid for their crimes. The Council had learned its lesson. But G1 knew this was not the end. There would be other threats, other challenges, other species who would test humanity's resolve. Let them come. Humanity would be ready. She turned to her crew. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. Take us home. The fleet moved as one. The stars blurred and stretched. And then they were gone, leaving the Council to contemplate a new universe. The age of human silence was over. The age of human dominance had begun.